Retail sales are crashing as the American consumer finally hitting the cat food. In a recent video, I mentioned how there are three key economic numbers that voters use to rate the economy: inflation, GDP, and consumer spending. In that video, I mentioned that robust consumer spending isn't so much optimism for the future at the moment as people trying to keep their head above water. Exhibit A being soaring default rates. The problem with debt-fueled consumer spending, of course, is that it is unsustainable. Every month, the debt gets bigger, not least because the 600 million credit cards in America charge 25% interest. Note, 49% of American cardholders are currently carrying a balance, meaning they are paying 25% interest, which is not far from what the mafia charges. Well, it turns out unsustainable comes at you fast. Fresh numbers last week say retail sales are tanking. They fell 0.8% on the month. That's an annualized drop of almost 10%, which would qualify as a crash. It was the worst year-on-year retail spending numbers since the worst of the COVID lockdowns. Incidentally, the previous month was also revised down, as always, Biden's finest statisticians hiding the bad news where the media sun don't shine. In fact, adjusting for inflation, total retail sales in the US are now below the level of 2021, before Joe Biden's inflation took off. So going on 3 years, we've actually been down. As Zero Hedge put it, the soft landing is morphing into a crash landing. The worst of the month were cars and building materials. In other words, people are pulling back on big-ticket spending, given that cars and houses are by far the most expensive consumer goods. But it was down across the board, with declines in gasoline, people are driving less, health, miscellaneous retailers, clothing, even sports equipment, as people are staying home. The bigger picture here is that despite media gaslighting on consumer spending, the data says consumers are worried. My colleague E.J. Antoni posted the widely cited Index of Consumer Sentiment from the University of Michigan, which measures how optimistic consumers feel about their finances and the state of the economy. The version that we usually see in the media goes back to 2021, when they were just ending lockdowns with Biden safely installed in the White House. So it looks great because the economy is no longer locked down. But if you zoom out, EJ went back to 1960, it is a very different story. In fact, over those 60 years, consumer sentiment has only been this bad in the middle of recessions. So consumers are spending, sure, but they're spending like it's a recession. In other words, they're spending to keep their heads above water. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. Retail sales now joins industrial production, housing starts, and housing permits as numbers that have all registered stagnation just in the past week. With inflation now rising for 4 months in a row, that stagnation is quickly morphing into stagflation. I've mentioned in recent videos my biggest concern, the doomsday scenario, which is that we are repeating the 1970s double peak stagflation. This time with an even more incompetent and venal president in office that could make it last 4 years. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.